Ladies, gentlemen, and vault hunters of all ages, Borderlands is at least partially at its core about power scaling. Your first time fighting each enemy in Borderlands 4 should be at least a little bit challenging. It should require a bit of patience, a bit of learning, just so you get to actually experience them properly, especially the bosses. But once you hit the end game, most people's main goal is finding the most consistent, easiest way to basically just trivialize every enemy in the game, and one of the core parts of doing that in any build is the weapon that you hold in your hands. It's not everything, and sometimes even the best weapons are only the best in niche-specific builds, but today we're going to talk about what I currently believe to be the 10 most powerful guns in Borderlands 4, which, to be clear, does include some purples. It's not purely legendaries, and we won't be talking about Ordinance, even though some of them technically are weapons. For some of the legendaries, they are as strong as they are right out of the box. Some of them require you to also hit a specific weapon part roll on it through further RNG, and some of these do get pretty nutty. These won't be necessarily ranked in any order against each other, though, as you're basically comparing like apples to oranges for a lot of them. They just are used in different builds, for different purposes, in different ways. With the exception of two of them that will break the game for literally anyone with basically nothing else equipped. So let's start with those. You've probably seen this one, which is making the rounds. It's extremely popular and well known, which is Kickballer. This is a legendary Maliwan shotgun that fires out an explosive elemental ball that bounces after it hits, and then will find somewhere else to go, where it will then bounce again and explode when it does so over and over. This weapon can spawn with the Jakobs ricochet on crit weapon part modifier, and that's when it goes absolutely haywire due to one specific interaction. Any projectile that does not disappear when it hits the target essentially multiplies itself if you get a ricochet with it. But the specific nature of bouncing projectiles breaks this even further. Use it with the Jakobs crit knife to guarantee the crits and ricochets, add on the enhancement for extra bounces from ricochets with the Jakobs part, and you get this just sort of infinitely looping flashbang explosion that will shred any enemy until they're a pile of dust, but usually you will also kill yourself in the process because it is a very large radius explosion as well. But it's still undeniably just infinite levels of power, essentially, while this interaction stays the way it is, at least. As for how to get this one for yourself, it is a dedicated drop from Sludgemaw, who is the boss inside of the Watershed Gate area of the Fadefields region, which you unlock during the Outbanders faction mission chain. Next up, let's talk something extremely similar, which is our first purple weapon today, and it is a specific roll of modifiers for a Maliwan shotgun. Some weapon parts, the licensed parts, can roll on any weapon, more or less, but some weapon bits are much more specific. The specific one that we're after today is the Energy Disc Alternate Fire Mode, which only shows up on Maliwan shotguns specifically. This, for all intents and purposes, works like Kickballer does, with a much smaller radius on the explosions. It is a disc projectile that pierces and bounces, and if you can get the weapon with the Jakobs ricochet on crit modifier as well, then the exact same interaction is possible where it will break, and you can use the guaranteed crit knife modifier and just fire this thing at the enemy and watch it bounce and ricochet and infinitely chain and multiply until either the enemy dies or the crit timer ends, basically. There's no farm for this one, but I do want to shout out Moxxi, who's the first person that I saw talk about this specific weapon roll and the fact that it is basically just another kickballer. After that, let's go over Sansaba Songbird. This extremely unassuming legendary has one very powerful trick to it. The legendary effect reads that it gains 100% weapon damage for 5 seconds after you swap weapons, which could be great if it, was a higher base damage weapon, but this is currently bugged. Right now, the effect only applies if you swap after shooting a bullet, but it also stacks with itself infinitely and has no timer on the actual buff the way that it says it should, meaning that you gain 100% weapon damage every time that you swap on and off of the weapon after you shoot a bullet. And this buff stays applied until you load into a properly instanced area, like the big main story boss fortresses. Anywhere else, it will stick with you at these same stacks forever, essentially, even through death or fast travel. This in itself means that with some patience, it can hit harder than literally anything else in the game in a singular shot. But an important note is that this applies to any damage dealt by the weapon. So an example is that this can roll with the Zip Rockets underbarrel modifier, and the Zip Rockets will also gain 100% of their damage every time that you gain a stack of this legendary effect. And I'm not sure if it can roll with an even stronger underbarrel but that is a really neat part of the way this weapon works, even despite the clear bugs going on for sure. To get this one for yourself, it is a dedicated drop from Rock'n'Rolla, who is the boss of this auger mine on the north side of the Carcadia Burns region. Moving on, we've got TK's Wave. This is a real classic in the Borderlands series, and this has always been fun to use, but it's quite strong in Borderlands 4 just for its base damage and base function. The legendary effect is that it fires 10 pellets, which comes out in a line and then move forwards in a wave-like pattern, but also these will bounce off of terrain if they hit it. The main expected use case for this weapon is to either fire it like an inch away from an enemy's crit spot because of the wide spread on the projectiles, or to use it in a room where bouncing projectiles will all eventually hit their target. And if you can hit all of them in the crit spot, it does a butt ton of damage as it fires 10 pellets that are nearly 2,000 damage per pellet, so base damage around 20,000 per shot, which is very high. That said, it's awkward and inconsistent to hit every pellet into a crit spot consistently, especially against dangerous enemies, unless you get a really special roll when it drops, which is the Atlas Tracker Underbarrel. This underbarrel, when applied, makes all projectiles home in on the place that the tracker hit, so if you get TK's Wave with the Atlas Underbarrel, if you hit the tracker on a critical spot of an enemy, you can then just unload the main shots of the weapon without much concern for aim, and all 10 projectiles from every shot will hit the crit spot even from range, which does a buttload of damage and completely changes the feeling of using the weapon. As for how to get this, it is actually also a dedicated drop from Rock'n'Rolla, the boss of the Auger Mine on the northern end of Carcadia Burns, so two of the strongest weapons from the exact same source. After that, let's talk about Hot Slugger. On the note of strong shotguns, this one is impossible to ignore really, but for more reasons than you might think. First, it's just a nice high damage shotgun. Second, it fires splash damaging projectiles, which gives it slightly more methods of scaling than most shotguns have. And third, it is a Jakobs one bullet shotgun, which is just a generally very strong archetype even for purple weapons, especially it has a somewhat hidden mechanic where if you mash the reload button after you shoot, you will reload way faster than if you were just letting it auto reload without pressing any buttons. But the big thing that makes this as strong as it is the legendary effect on it, plus 30% to all damage you do after you get a kill while holding this weapon, stacking up to 3 times. This means after 3 kills, it is 90% bonus damage, which is just a lot of extra bonus, and the main thing that makes this super easy to stack is that the kill itself does not have to be with the shotgun to trigger this, it just has to be in your hands when an enemy dies. However, despite saying that it just gives a damage increase in general, it does only apply to Hot Slugger's damage itself, but it's still just absolutely fantastic and it's the ideal weapon for a number of different builds so far in the game. If you want to get this for yourself then, it is a dedicated drop from Chad, the boss of this order bunker all the way on the eastern side of the Terminus Range region. Next up, let's talk about another purple weapon, which is actually another Jakobs shotgun as well, but we don't really care about the actual weapon so much as we do one specific underbarrel. Like with the Maliwan shotguns earlier, this underbarrel, which is called Spread Launcher, only spawns on specific Jakobs shotguns, no other weapon type, no other manufacturer, and just by reading the tooltip you can probably work out why this is so strong because the numbers on it are just sort of obscene. The base damage is like 100,000 when you fire it, and because it comes out as one technical shot even though it's split into 5, this means it can be boosted entirely by tons of different things that boost the damage of your next shot, like the Amp Shield effect or the Amp Rep Kit effect for just massive damage increases, and this can one-shot most bosses in the game in a proper setup as a result, though it's worth mentioning that it does have splash damage and so you can absolutely hurt yourself if you're too close. And this is just the underbarrel of the weapon, nothing more. To be a touch more specific, this can spawn on any Jakobs shotgun, but the highest damage variation does seem to be linked to a shotgun with less magazine size. So the ideal version of this would spawn only on a Jakobs shotgun with 1 or 2 magazine size specifically. That said, as this is a purple, again there's no dedicated drop source, you're going to have to go on pure RNG whether you come across this or not. Moving on then, we've got Wombo Combo, and this will be by far the simplest entry on the list to explain. It is a Vladof assault rifle with high fire rate, it can work with the Vladof enhancements which can also be very strong, and the legendary effect is that as you fire the weapon, it will automatically fire underbarrel rockets as well, which is basically like having a permanent underbarrel attachment that fires for free when you use the already solid assault rifle that it is as a base. It is a ton of hits in very quick succession, which makes it pretty good for builds that scale off of fire rate, but it also just does a ton of damage on its own to begin with, and is one of the weapons on this list where I would say unless you're in like super deep endgame, regardless of your build, you can just pick this up and have a great time obliterating enemies. And even in super deep endgame, there are builds where this is the prime choice of weapon. To get it for yourself, it is a dedicated drop from the boss of this Ripper site here on the northern side of the Carcadia Burns region. Next up is Rainbow Vomit, another legendary Jakobs shotgun, but one that breaks the mold on what a Jakobs shotgun usually would be, as it's very, very elementally focused. Specifically, it fires 6 projectiles, which are all elemental globs. These are splash damage projectiles, which provides a way to boost them, and they are all split between 3 elements, so you get 2 globs of each element. Which elements that you get on it are a random roll when the weapon drops, and while the weapon is just good in general, it's very high damage per shot, especially for people who have skill tree nodes that just give general element or status damage increases, but this hits with 3 elements and applies 3 statuses at the same time, so if you have those, it builds very well. But it's also extra fun if 2 of the 3 elements synergize. For example, you can get a version of this that has Cryo and Corrosive as 2 of the 3 damage types, which both deal bonus damage to armored health, the yellow health bars, and so that specific Rainbow Vomit would be hyper specialized for armored health. All in all, it's just a very strong weapon as a base that has a few ways to scale damage that a standard Jakobs shotgun doesn't have. To get this one for yourself, it is a dedicated drop from Leader Willem, who is a boss in Carcadia Burns that you unlock at the end of a side quest chain. The chain starts with Enter the Electi in Carcadia City and ends with the Mole's Gambit side quest. Ninth today, we've got our final purple weapon on the list, which is any Vladof SMG with either the Taser or Flamethrower underbarrel attachment. Vladof SMGs are fantastic in general for just being high fire rate machines, and there are plenty of builds that can scale well off of fire rate, but the underbarrels are what make these especially special, and these 2 specifically can only spawn on Vladof SMGs. The Taser underbarrel is a projectile that you fire that will apply a strong shock damage per second debuff to an enemy that importantly counts as being gun damage, not status damage, and it's also capable of triggering a bunch of effects that a status normally wouldn't, despite essentially working in a very similar way. As well, if your SMG has the Jakobs ricochet on crit part, the Taser projectile itself can ricochet to an extra enemy if you crit with it when fired. The Flamethrower attachment instead is just a flamethrower that comes out of the front of your weapon, but both this and the Taser, more than anything, are just very, very generally used extremely strong for their damage per second output, compared to just like using a standard weapon or even using other underbarrels that are more than one shot. They are super reliable, they are strong weapons, and they only get better when you have Vladof enhancements to use as well. And I know there are legendary Vladof enhancements that exist that have both the effect that increases underbarrel attachment damage and the effect that reduces underbarrel cooldown, which would then make these go just so extremely hard. That said, purple weapon, so there's not really a way to actually farm it, though that said, these do feel, in my opinion, way more common to find at random than the previous 2 purple weapon archetypes that we've talked about so far. Finally today then, we've got Katagawa's Revenge. I had to include it. It is at the center of the strongest build that I have made so far, but I do have to say that it is pretty niche. This build can work with a bunch of other weapons, but nothing applies its damage better or faster than Katagawa's Revenge. This weapon has a fire mode and a shock mode, and when it's on shock mode specifically when you shoot, it will create some storm clouds around the place the bullet hits that will do shock damage per second to the closest enemy. Every one of these sort of procs of damage will count as gun damage, and so when you have something like Harlow does, that can give you flat damage applied any time that you hit an enemy, every single hit from these storm clouds will proc those effects, and that is what makes this weapon go crazy. So any build that scales purely off of fire rate, like the actual damage is in the form of some sort of flat damage bonus that applies once to every bullet that hits, this is the best way that I have found to apply that. And so without a focus build around it, this weapon is not that strong, but in the right position, this is easily one of the strongest weapons in the whole game. And again, you can roll it with the Jakobs Ricochet on crit modifier, of course, which makes it create some bonus storm clouds with every shot that crits, just to make it even stronger. To get this one for yourself, then, it is a dedicated drop from Driller Hole, who is the boss located in this little sort of mini fortress on the western side of Carcadia Burns region, and you can only fight him after you've done the related story quest for him that unlocks it. That just about does it for today then, everyone. My 10 strongest weapons in Borderlands 4 so far, what makes them strong, any specific things they need to reach that level of power, and how to get them for yourself. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and if you think you know a weapon that rivals or even beats some of these, feel free to leave it down in the comments below and I will have a look into it too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, I'm the conductor of the poop train! Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice.
to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage is, goodbye.